In PHP, loops are one of the most important concepts because they allow us to repeat a block of code multiple times without writing the same lines again and again. Just like other programming languages, PHP offers four main types of loops: the while loop, the do-while loop, the for loop, and the Foreach loop. Each of these loops works in a slightly different way, but their purpose is the same: to make repetitive tasks easier, faster, and more efficient. The while loop runs as long as a specified condition remains true. Before each repetition, PHP checks the condition. If the condition is true, the loop executes the code inside it. This is useful when you don't know exactly how many times the loop should run, but you know the condition that controls it. The do-while loop is very similar, but with one key difference. In this loop, PHP executes the code first, and then it checks the condition. This means the block of code will run at least once, even if the condition is false the first time. It's helpful in situations where you want to execute something before validating the condition. The for loop is commonly used when you know exactly how many times you want to repeat something. It has three parts: initialization, condition, and increment or decrement. Initialization sets the starting point. The condition decides how long the loop should run, and the increment section updates the value after every repetition. This loop is great for counting numbers or iterating through fixed ranges. Finally, the Foreach loop is specially designed for arrays and objects. Instead of dealing with numbers or conditions, it automatically goes through each item in an array, making it the easiest and cleanest way to work with lists of data. It allows you to access each element one by one without worrying about indexes. In simple words, loops in PHP help you automate repetitive work, reduce your code, and make your programs run more efficiently. Understanding these four loops is a major step towards becoming confident in PHP programming.
Now let's continue our topic and move into the first type of loop in PHP, which is the while loop. The while loop is one of the simplest looping structures in PHP, and understanding it makes learning the other loops much easier. In a while loop, PHP checks the given condition before executing any code inside the loop. This means the loop will only start running if the condition is true right from the beginning. Think of it like a security gate. Before you enter, the gatekeeper checks whether the condition is met. If the condition is true, such as a variable being less than a certain number, then the loop begins. Once inside, the code inside the loop gets executed. After completing one cycle, PHP does not stop. Instead, it goes back and checks the condition again. If the condition is still true, the loop runs again. This cycle continues repeatedly until the condition becomes false. Inside the loop, it is very important to update the value of the variable that controls the condition, usually by increasing or decreasing it. Without this update, the condition may never become false, which results in an infinite loop. An infinite loop keeps running forever and can freeze or crash your program. So updating the variable is a key step in making the while loop work properly. When the condition finally becomes false, the loop stops and the program moves forward to the next line of code outside the loop. This makes the while loop perfect for situations where you don't know the exact number of repetitions, but you do know the condition that should control the process. In simple terms, the while loop follows this pattern: check the condition, run the code, update the value, check again, repeat until the condition becomes false. Once you understand this flow, you can use while loops to perform a wide variety of repeating tasks in PHP.
Now, let's continue with a simple and practical example of how a while loop works in PHP. The code shown here displays numbers from 1 to 10, one by one, using a basic while loop. This example is perfect for beginners because it clearly shows every step of the looping process, from initialization to condition checking, and finally to updating the loop variable. The program begins by initializing the variable $n with the value 1. This starting value is very important because it sets the loop in motion. After initialization, PHP checks the condition $n less than or equal to 10. This condition determines whether the loop should continue or stop. Since 1 is less than or equal to 10, the condition is true, and the loop begins its first cycle. Inside the loop, PHP executes the statement that prints the message, the number is $n. So during the first iteration, the output will say the number is 1. Once the message is displayed, the next step is to update the variable $n by increasing it using $n++. This is extremely important because without updating $n, the condition would always stay true, causing an endless loop. After the increment, PHP goes back to the top of the loop and checks the condition again. Now $n equals 2, which is still less than or equal to 10. So the second cycle begins. The loop continues repeating this process, checking the condition, printing the current value, and then increasing $n until it finally reaches $n equals 11, at which point the condition $n less than or equal to 10 becomes false and the loop stops. This example shows how a while loop works step by step and how it can be used to perform repetitive tasks such as printing a sequence of numbers. By understanding this flow, you can apply while loops to many real-world situations where you need to repeat actions until a certain condition is met.
Let's now breaking down the while loop example even further, using a step-by-step visualization of how the variable n increases with each iteration. This deeper explanation helps you clearly understand what happens inside the loop at every stage, making the overall concept easier to follow, especially for beginners. The code starts with n equals 1, which is our initial value. The while loop checks the condition n is less than or equal to 10. Since 1 is less than or equal to 10, the condition is true, so the loop begins. At this point, PHP prints the message, the number is 1. After printing, the variable is updated using n++, which means the value of n increases by 1. So now n becomes 2. Next, the loop returns to the condition check. Step 2 begins with n equals 2, and the condition n is less than or equal to 10 is still true. PHP prints the number is 2, then increments the number again. The loop continues repeating this cycle smoothly. Check condition, print output, increment, repeat. As we move through the steps, we see the value of n increasing one at a time. At step 3, n is 3. At step 4, n is 4, and so on. Every time the condition stays true, so the loop keeps running. Eventually, the loop reaches step 10, where n is 10. Since 10 is still less than or equal to 10, the condition is true, and PHP prints the number is 10. After printing, the program increments n again, bringing it to 11. Now we reach step 11, where n is 11. When PHP checks the condition this time, n is less than or equal to 10, the result is false. Because the condition is no longer true, the while loop stops. The program exits the loop and continues executing whatever comes next in the script. On the right side, you can see the complete printed output list. It shows every message generated by the loop, starting from the number is 1 and ending with the number is 10. This clearly demonstrates how the while loop progresses in order, one step at a time, until the stopping condition is reached. This step-by-step breakdown is very important because it shows how loops work internally, how they start, how they update values, and how they eventually terminate. Understanding this flow will make it much easier for you to work with loops in more complex situations in the future. Now, let's continue our topic by moving on to the second type of loop in PHP, which is the do-while loop. This loop works in a slightly different way compared to the while loop we discussed earlier. The biggest difference is that in a do-while loop, the code block runs first and the condition is checked after. This means the code inside the loop will always execute at least one time, even if the condition is false from the very beginning. The flow of the do-while loop is very simple to understand. First, PHP enters the block of code under the do section and executes whatever statements are written there. Once the code block runs, PHP then moves on to the while part, where it checks the condition. If the condition is true, the loop repeats and runs the code block again. If the condition is false, the loop stops and the program continues with the next instructions outside the loop. This execute first, check later behavior makes the do-while loop useful in situations where you want the program to perform an action at least once, no matter what. For example, displaying a menu, asking for user input, or printing something on the screen before validating conditions are common scenarios where do-while loops are helpful. The diagram in the image clearly shows this flow, starting with the code execution, then moving to the condition check, and repeating until the condition becomes false. The most important point to remember is that the do-while loop guarantees at least one execution, whereas the normal while loop may skip the code block entirely if the condition is false initially. The image also mentions code snippet 9, which displays numbers from 1 to 5 using a do-while loop. This example will help you clearly see how the loop runs the code first and then checks the condition afterward. Overall, the do-while loop gives you more control when you want an action to happen first and the condition to be verified later. Understanding this difference will make your loop usage more efficient and effective as you continue learning PHP.
Continuing with our discussion on the do-while loop, let's break down code snippet 9 in a simple and understandable way. In this program, the variable n is initially assigned the value 15. Because this is a do-while loop, PHP will immediately execute the code inside the do block before checking any condition. That means the very first output printed on the screen will be, the number is 15, even before the loop checks whether the condition is true or false. After printing this first value, the next step is to update the variable using n++, which increases the value of n by 1. So n becomes 16. Once this increment happens, PHP moves on to the condition check, which is n is less than or equal to 20. Since 16 is less than or equal to 20, the condition is true, so the loop continues. The code block runs again, printing the number is 16. After printing, n++ increases the value to 17. The loop then checks the condition again, and since 17 is still within the allowed range, the loop repeats. This cycle continues smoothly, printing 17, then 18, then 19, and finally 20. Each time the number is printed first, then incremented, and then checked against the condition. Once the value of n becomes 21, the condition, n is less than or equal to 20, becomes false. At that moment, the loop stops immediately, and the program exits the do-while loop and does not print the number 21 because the condition no longer allows it. The key takeaway here is that the code block inside a do-while loop always executes at least one time, even if the initial value does not meet the condition. In this example, even if n started at 25, the loop would still run once before stopping. That's what makes the do-while loop unique and useful when you want an action to occur before the condition is validated. This step-by-step process gives you a clear understanding of how the do-while loop handles execution, updating, condition checking, and termination.
To wrap up the concept of the do-while loop, let's highlight the most important difference between the while loop and the do-while loop. This difference is not only simple, but also extremely important for beginners to understand, because it affects how your program behaves in real situations. In a while loop, PHP checks the condition first. Only if the condition is true does the loop begin executing the code inside it. This means that if the starting value does not satisfy the condition, the while loop will not run even once. The code block may be skipped entirely. But in a do-while loop, things work the opposite way. The code inside the loop is executed first, without checking anything. After running the instructions, PHP then checks the condition. If the condition is true, the loop repeats. If the condition is false, the loop stops. Because the code executes before the condition is tested, the do-while loop always runs at least one time, no matter what. The output shown in the image demonstrates this behavior perfectly. Starting with n equals 15, the loop prints the values 15, 16, 17, 18,
19, and 20. Even if 15 had not met the condition initially, the message for 15 would still be printed because the do-while loop guarantees one execution. This key difference helps you decide which loop is better for your situation. If you want to test a condition before running anything, use a while loop. But if you want your code to run at least once before checking the condition, the do-while loop is the right choice.
Now let's continue our topic by introducing the next and one of the most commonly used loops in PHP, the for loop. This loop is perfect for situations where you already know exactly how many times you want a task to repeat. Unlike the while and do-while loops, which depend mainly on conditions, the for loop is tightly structured and is designed for running a block of code a fixed number of times. Because of this, it is widely used in counting, calculations, and repetitive tasks where the number of iterations is clear. The for loop consists of three important parts: initialization, condition, and increment or update counter. These three parameters work together to control the entire flow of the loop. The first part is initialization, where you set the starting value of your loop counter. This is usually a variable like $i, beginning at a number such as 0 or 1. This initial value is what gets used in the very first iteration of the loop. The second part is the condition, sometimes called the test counter. This condition determines how long the loop should keep running. Before every iteration, PHP checks this condition. If it is true, the loop executes the code inside the curly braces. If it becomes false, the loop stops immediately. The third part is the increment or update counter. This is the instruction that updates the value of your loop counter after each cycle. Most often, this is written as $i++, which increases the counter by 1. You can also decrease the value or change it by any amount you need. Putting these three parts together, the for loop follows a clear and predictable flow. Initialize, check condition, execute code, update counter, repeat. This makes it easy to use when you know exactly how many times your loop should run, such as printing numbers, generating patterns, or processing each item a specific number of times. The diagram in the image shows this flow visually, helping you see how each step connects to the next, creating a clean and efficient loop structure. Once you understand these three parameters, you can create powerful and flexible loops in PHP using almost any numeric or counting logic you want.
Let's continue our explanation by looking at code snippet 10, which demonstrates how a for loop can be used to display numbers from 11 to 20. This example clearly shows how the initialization, condition, and increment steps work together to control the entire loop process. The loop begins with initialization, where the value of n is set to 11. This is the starting point of the loop, and it means that the very first number printed by the program will be 11. After initialization, PHP immediately checks the condition, which in this case is $n less than or equal to 20. Since 11 is less than or equal to 20, the condition is true and the code inside the loop is executed. During the execution step, PHP prints the message, "The number is 11." After printing the value, the loop moves to the increment stage where $n increases the value of n by 1. This means that $n becomes 12. The loop then returns to the condition check. Since 12 is still less than or equal to 20, the loop runs again. This cycle continues smoothly through each number: 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, and finally 20. At every step, the pattern stays the same: check condition, print value, increment, repeat. Once $n becomes 21, the condition $n less than or equal to 20 becomes false. When this happens, the loop stops immediately and the program exits the for loop. This example shows how predictable and controlled the for loop is. It runs a fixed number of times, making it extremely useful when the number of iterations is known in advance. Whether you're printing numbers, generating lists, or performing repeated actions, the for loop gives you a clean and efficient structure to work with.
To further understand how the for loop works, let's look at the flow of the loop shown in this visualization, where the program prints numbers from 11 to 20. This example clearly demonstrates the structure and behavior of the for loop in a simple and step-by-step manner, making it easy for beginners to follow. The loop begins with the initialization step, where the value of n is set to 11. This is the starting point of the loop and determines the first number that will appear in the output. Once initialization is done, the loop immediately proceeds to the condition check, which in this case is n less than or equal to 20. As long as this condition remains true, the loop continues running. Since 11 is less than or equal to 20, the condition is satisfied and the execution step begins. Here, PHP prints the message. The number is 11. After printing this value, the loop reaches the increment step, where $n++ increases the value of n by 1. This moves the loop forward, changing the value from 11 to 12. The loop then repeats the entire cycle, check the condition, execute the code, and increment the variable. With each iteration, the number increases by 1, 12, 13, 14, 15, and so on. Each number is printed sequentially, and the loop progression continues smoothly. This process continues until the loop reaches n equals 20. The number 20 is printed as the final valid output because it still satisfies the condition n less than or equal to 20. After printing 20, the variable increments once more, becoming 21. At this point, the condition becomes false and the loop stops immediately. The list on the right side of the image shows the entire output generated by the loop, starting from 11 and ending at 20. This neatly demonstrates how predictable and controlled the for loop is, perfect for tasks where the number of repetitions is known in advance. Overall, this visualization clearly shows how initialization, condition checking, execution, and increment work together to form a complete for loop cycle in PHP. Now let's move on to the final loop in PHP, the Foreach loop, which is specially designed for working with arrays. Unlike the other loops where you must manage counters, conditions, and increments manually, the Foreach loop makes array handling extremely simple and efficient. It automatically goes through each element of an array, one by one, without you needing to track indexes or update any counter yourself. The syntax of the Foreach loop is very straightforward. You simply write for each $array as $value, then the code to execute in the loop. Here, $array represents the data source, and $value is a temporary variable that stores the current item of the array during each iteration. The code inside the loop runs once for every element in the array. The image explains this process beautifully using an example array of 4 fruits: apple, banana, cherry, and date. The loop starts by pointing to the first element, apple. During iteration 1, the value stored in $value becomes apple, and the code block is executed. After that, the pointer automatically moves to the next item. In iteration 2, the value becomes banana. Again, the code inside the loop runs and the pointer advances to the next item. In iteration 3, the value becomes cherry, and the loop executes once again. Finally, in iteration 4, the value becomes date. After executing the code, the pointer reaches the end of the array and the loop terminates. The best part about the Foreach loop is that you don't have to worry about array indexes like 0, 1, or 2. PHP handles all of that behind the scenes. Your job is simply to write what should happen for each item. This makes Foreach the easiest and most readable loop for working with arrays. By the end of the loop, all elements have been processed one after another, and the code inside the loop has executed 4 times, once for each fruit. This clean and automatic behavior is what makes Foreach a favorite among PHP developers when dealing with lists, arrays, and collections of data.